It's just past sunset in coastal Norway, sometime in the early 9th century. The wind's cutting sharp off the fjord, slipping between the wooden slats of a longhouse built by calloused hands. Inside, it's warm. The central hearth glows a deep orange, casting shadows that stretch along the curved beams of the roof. Smoke hangs low, sweet with peat and birch. Children whisper near the walls, wrapped in furs. A dog yawns, tail thumping lazily on straw. And near the fire, a man named Thorvald, shipwright, father, warrior, stirs his bowl of barley stew, eyes heavy from the day. Outside, the world is ice and darkness. But inside, it's peace. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. This house, this quiet moment, this flickering half-light, it's the perfect setup for the best sleep a human being can get. That's not poetic license. That's modern science talking. We tend to picture Vikings in constant chaos, swords flashing, sails billowing, axes breaking down monastery doors. But the reality is far more nuanced, because for every raid and expedition, there were months spent at home, farming, building, storytelling, preparing for winter. And during those long northern nights, especially in winter, when the sun barely lifted over the horizon, the Norse people entered a rhythm of rest that was almost perfectly in sync with how the human body is built to sleep. Think about that. While we lie awake at 2 a.m., staring at glowing rectangles, scrolling through curated chaos, the Vikings were sleeping in near-complete darkness, their circadian rhythms untouched by artificial light. While we pop melatonin like candy and wonder why we still wake up exhausted, their pineal glands were working in full harmony with the natural world. No phones, no streetlights, no deadlines that bleed into bedtime. Just firelight, cold air, wool blankets, and a culture that understood, perhaps instinctively, when to push forward and when to rest. Here's what we know. The Viking Age stretched roughly from 793 to 10 CC, spanning hundreds of years and vast territories. Across that time, from the fjords of Norway to the wind-swept settlements of Iceland and the British Isles, people lived not by the clock, but by the sun, the moon, and the seasons. Their lives were hard, yes, but not fragmented the way ours are. And that made all the difference. Archaeological digs at sites like Jorvik, modern-day York, Rye Bay, and Icelandic farmsteads have uncovered longhouses built with almost no windows, just thick turf walls and narrow doors. Darkness wasn't a problem. It was a feature. Their sleep wasn't crammed into a tight 7-hour window between emails and morning meetings. It unfolded naturally, often in 2 distinct phases. A first deep sleep, a period of calm wakefulness in the middle of the night, then a second sleep until dawn. The sagas even mention it. Fyrsta Sveffen and Annan Sveffen. They knew it was normal. They planned around it. Meanwhile, we've only recently started realizing that this segmented sleep might actually be the way human beings are supposed to rest. And that's the paradox. A warrior culture, born in cold and fire, brutal in battle, and relentless in exploration, somehow managed to create sleep conditions that modern doctors and researchers now call ideal. The darkness, the temperature, the quiet, the timing of meals, the absence of glowing distractions, the physical exhaustion from real daily labor, the security of sleeping near family. All of it aligned, not by design, but by lifestyle, into a sleep system that just worked. And here's the question. If the Vikings, fierce, rough, untamed, could stumble into perfect sleep 1,000 years ago, what does that say about the rest of us? We've got blackout curtains and weighted blankets and podcasts that whisper us to sleep, yet we're more restless than ever. Maybe what we've lost isn't just a good night's sleep. Maybe it's the connection to the rhythms that made that sleep possible in the first place. So before we dive deeper into the Viking way of rest, ask yourself, how did these people, with no science, no data, no gadgets, end up sleeping better than the most advanced generation in history? Let's find out. Chapter 2. How the Vikings slept, and why it actually worked. The fire had burned low by the time Thorvald stirred. The embers crackled quietly, casting faint orange halos against the timbered ceiling beams of his longhouse. Outside, snow pressed against the turf walls, muffling the wind like a woolen blanket drawn over the world. Inside, the air was still, thick with the scent of smoke, pine, and salted meat. He opened his eyes not in confusion, but in calm. This waking was expected. This was part of the rhythm. He rose slowly, pulling on his cloak and stepping over the straw bedding where two of his sons still slept soundly. His wife, Sigrid, already awake, sat near the hearth, cradling a clay mug of warm goat's milk, watching the fire with a thoughtful stillness. They exchanged no words. None were needed. This was their in-between time, a quiet hour, a natural pause. See, Thorvald wasn't up because he couldn't sleep. He was up because this was sleep, the way it had always been. For centuries, long before alarm clocks and electric light, the people of Viking-age Scandinavia slept in two distinct phases. It wasn't strange. It wasn't disordered. It was normal. It was biphasic sleep, a pattern where you fall asleep soon after sundown, wake for a short period in the middle of the night, then return to sleep until morning. This wasn't unique to Thorvald. It was common across Europe before industrialization erased the night with its glowing factories and fluorescent time cards. The Vikings simply lived by what the land demanded. And in the north, that meant adjusting to extremes. Winters with 16 hours of darkness, summers with barely any at all. Instead of fighting those cycles, they flowed with them. Sleep wasn't rigid or scheduled. It followed the sun, the season, the fire. It wasn't measured in hours. It was measured in energy, in readiness, in the feel of the body. And it wasn't just about sleep duration. It was how they slept, where, and why. Their homes, longhouses built low and thick against the cold, were made not to invite the light, but to keep it out. Few windows, heavy turf insulation, no glowing candles on the hour. When the sun went down, so did the world. The darkness was near total. And modern sleep science now tells us that kind of darkness is exactly what our brains need to release melatonin, to fall into deep, restorative rest. And here's where it gets even more interesting. During those quiet midnight hours between first and second sleep, Vikings weren't just waiting to feel tired again. They used that time, thoughtfully, quietly. They tended the fire, checked on animals, whispered prayers, made plans for the next day, maybe even shared a drink or a story. Astrid, the village healer, she'd be steeping herbs during this time. She knew what plants eased the body and cleared the mind. Hops, valerian, linden blossom. These were tools passed down through generations. Not medicine, as we'd call it today, but practical, effective knowledge. And while modern medicine is just now circling back to the idea that biphasic sleep might be better for our biology than the forced 8-hour chapter, the Vikings were already living it. Not because a study told them to, but because their lives were built in tune with the earth. They didn't need theories. They had instinct, repetition, and a culture that didn't fear rest. Their meals were eaten early, hearty, grounding food that fueled the day but never sat heavy in the gut come nightfall. Their bodies were worn from real labor, from rowing, hauling, building, weaving, grinding grain by hand, not from staring at screens or sitting for 12 hours straight. They didn't need apps to fall asleep. Their lives made them ready for sleep. And here's the paradox again. The very people we imagine as wild, brutal, chaotic, raiders in iron helmets actually had a deeper, calmer, more harmonious relationship with rest than we do. Their sleep wasn't something to fix. It was something to live. Thorvald would return to his bedding soon, not rushed, not stressed, just ready. And before the faint light of dawn pushed against the heavy door, he'd already have slept more soundly than most people do in the age of optimized sleep routines and $300 smart pillows. So what exactly made their rest so powerful? It wasn't one thing. It was everything. The rhythm of their bodies, the silence of their homes, the warmth of the fire, the heaviness in their bones from a day well lived, and the quiet understanding that rest wasn't weakness. It was preparation, a tool, a necessity, the other half of life. And it worked. Chapter 3. A Night Divided. Inside the Viking sleep ritual, the longhouse was nearly silent. Only the occasional creak of timber under frost or the low snuffle of sleeping livestock broke the stillness. Outside, the world was locked in winter's grip. Endless darkness, biting cold, and a sky so black it felt bottomless. Inside, the hearth still glowed softly, a banked bed of coals radiating warmth into the low room. Bjorn Haraldsson opened his eyes. It was the middle of the night, and he was right on schedule. This wasn't strange. It wasn't insomnia. It wasn't some restless exception to a perfect sleep. It was the pattern, the rhythm his body knew, as deeply as it knew hunger or breath. First sleep had come easily after supper, his muscles heavy from chopping firewood and hauling hay. Now, like most nights in the long Scandinavian winter, he was awake. Not for long. Maybe an hour. Just enough time to stoke the fire, check the goats, sip a little ale, and return to bed for the second sleep. This was biphasic sleep, the two-phase night that, for most of human history, was normal. We don't live this way anymore. Today, we chase the holy grail of 8 uninterrupted hours, trying to cram deep sleep into a narrow window between Netflix and morning alarms. But back then, especially in northern latitudes where winter swallowed the sun for months, a night was just too long to sleep straight through. So people didn't try. They slept in 2 segments, separated by a peaceful, waking hour in between. The Old Norse had names for this. Fyrsta svefen, first sleep, then a pause. Then anad svefen, second sleep. It's not just theory. The sagas confirm it. In the Grettir saga, Grettir Asmundarsson wakes in the night, stretches, and goes to tend to household tasks before returning to his bedroll. In the Egil saga, conversations unfold quietly in the dark hours between sleeps, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And really, it was. This wasn't time wasted. It was time reclaimed. A mental reset. A moment of warmth, of stillness, of quiet reflection. Modern science backs it up. Historian A. Roger Ekirk uncovered hundreds of historical references to segmented sleep in pre-industrial societies, not just in Scandinavia, but across medieval Europe, Asia, even colonial America. More than just folklore, biphasic sleep has biological roots. Studies show that in complete darkness, human bodies naturally settle into this two-part rhythm. During the waking phase, levels of prolactin, the hormone tied to calm and relaxation, surge, promoting a feeling of gentle contentment, not agitation. And the archaeological evidence from Viking settlements? It's right there in the soot and ash. At Jorvik, what we now call York, excavations revealed fire pits that had been consistently maintained during nighttime hours. Coals rebanked, ashes cleared. These fires weren't just for show. They were essential. A longhouse in winter could freeze fast without a living flame. Someone had to rise in the night, stir the embers, feed the fire. That someone was often already awake, because the sleep cycle allowed it. Bjorn wasn't alone in the dark. His wife, Svala, had already stirred a pot of herbs near the coals. She wasn't talking, but she was awake. Down the platform, his father murmured something in a dream. The goats shifted in their stall near the door, and beyond the longhouse walls, other fires glowed faintly through the night, neighbors doing the same, caught in the same rhythm, held by the same ancient beat. This wakeful hour wasn't filled with anxiety. No clocks ticked, no screens glowed. There was no sense of failure. Just time. Time to think, to tend, to be still. Some nights, Bjorn carved a tool or spun a tale. Other nights, he watched the fire breathe. Then, when the moment passed and the calm returned, he lay back down beside his family, eyes already closing. And so began the second sleep. Today, we call it a disorder when we wake in the night. Back then, it was simply the way it was done. A cultural habit, a biological pattern, a survival tool. And now, scientists are realizing it might have been healthier all along. Bjorn didn't know the word circadian. He couldn't explain the endocrine system. But his body knew what it needed. Deep rest in darkness, a pause to breathe, and then rest again. In that rhythm, his life unfolded, one divided night after another. And in that ancient pattern of sleep, uninterrupted by panic or productivity, lies a secret we're only just beginning to rediscover. Chapter 4, Dark by Design. The Viking embrace of night. The fire had faded to a whisper, just a pulse of orange tucked under a blanket of ash. The longhouse was still, not quiet. Still. There's a difference. You could feel the weight of the silence pressing into the room, thick as the furs hung over the doors, soft as the straw under Bjorn's shoulder blades. He couldn't see his hand, though it rested inches from his face. Not a crack of moonlight cut through the turf walls. Not a glimmer leaked from a window, because there were no real windows, only slits in the wood, sealed tight with hide or oiled cloth when night fell. And in that cocoon of darkness, where the only sound was breath and the slow shifting of sleepers, his body did what it was designed to do. It rested. This was darkness like most people today have never felt. Total, unbroken, ancient. The kind of darkness that lets your mind go quiet and your body remember how to sleep. Not just lightly, not restlessly, but deeply. And it wasn't an accident. Viking homes were built for this. The walls of the longhouse were packed with turf and timber, not to let light in, but to keep heat from leaking out. Light wasn't just rare, it was rationed. When night came, it came. Their only glow came from fire pits, oil lamps, or tallow candles, all dim, all warm-hued. Nothing like the cold, buzzing blue light that floods our homes today. No LEDs, no phones, no screens, just a low flame and the silence of a world that wasn't fighting sleep. Modern scientists say that this level of darkness triggers a powerful biological response, the release of melatonin, a hormone that tells your brain, hey, it's time to shut down and recover. Studies show that exposure to artificial blue light, like what spills out of your phone or TV, can delay melatonin production by as much as 3 hours. But back then, Viking bodies were synced with the sun and stars. No confusion, no interference, just rhythm. In the dead of winter, this rhythm stretched into something strange and beautiful. In northern Scandinavia, the sun might not rise until mid-morning and could disappear by mid-afternoon. That's 16 to 20 hours of darkness a day. For the modern mind, that sounds oppressive, depressing even. But for the Norse, it was an invitation. Darkness wasn't something to be feared or conquered. It was a friend, a time for stories, a time for closeness, a time for long, segmented sleep, broken gently by fire tending or quiet conversation. That deep night, layered in silence and shadow, gave their bodies what ours rarely get anymore. Space to rest, to restore, to breathe without interruption. But what about summer? Now that's where their ingenuity really shows. In high summer, especially in places like northern Norway or Iceland, the sun barely sets at all. The midnight sun can keep the sky lit for 22 hours a day. But even then, Vikings adapted. Archaeological digs in Iceland show sleeping chambers tucked into thick turf walls, recessed corners that stayed cool and dark. Heavy wool curtains, sometimes dyed or layered, could be drawn tight to chapter out the light. In some homes, sleeping alcoves were placed behind carved wooden partitions, deep in the structure, creating an artificial night even when the world outside refused to sleep. They understood something we've forgotten. It's not about forcing your body to follow a fixed schedule. It's about giving it the conditions to do what it's naturally built to do. And darkness, real, deep, unbroken darkness, is one of the most powerful tools in that equation. Recent sleep studies prove this. When modern people are removed from artificial light, no bulbs, no screens, just firelight and sunlight, their melatonin levels spike by 30% within a single week. Sleep onset becomes faster. Sleep quality improves. People wake up rested, not because they tried harder, but because their bodies were allowed to work right. That's what the Vikings had, not perfection, but alignment. So as Bjorn closed his eyes, wrapped in fur and straw, his breath slowed, his body dropped into that first sleep, and the darkness held him like a cradle. Not because he planned it, not because he tracked it, but because the world around him said, now is the time to rest. And he listened. That's the lesson. True sleep doesn't begin when you close your eyes. It begins when the world around you stops fighting the night. Chapter 5. All under one roof, the Viking way of sleeping together. When the last ember dimmed and the hearth's warmth began to settle low into the floorboards, the household of Gunnar Hamunderson began to fade into sleep, not one by one, but together. The longhouse, stretching 20 meters from end to end, breathed like a single body. You could hear it in the soft rhythm of sleepers, children murmuring in dreams, an elder coughing once, then falling quiet. The deep, even breath of a dozen lives wrapped in wool, straw, and fur. This was not a home of walls and doors and hallways. This was not a place of your room and mine. In the Viking world, sleep was not private. It was shared. Along the thick wooden walls of the longhouse ran raised sleeping platforms, long, continuous benches built into the structure itself. At the Icelandic site of Stong, archaeologists found them still intact, running the entire length of the hall like communal beds. At Jorvik, in what is now modern-day York, the same pattern emerged. No evidence of individual rooms, no isolated cots. Just one long space where the entire household, parents, children, elders, farmhands, sometimes even travelers, settled in for the night, shoulder to shoulder. To us, it might sound cramped, but to them, it was natural. This sleeping arrangement offered more than just a place to rest. It offered security, warmth, connection. During those long, bitter Scandinavian winters, when temperatures dropped below freezing and the night stretched on for nearly 20 hours, body heat wasn't just comforting, it was life-saving. Furs helped, wool helped, but nothing insulated better than the quiet press of another person close by. And in an age when threats were real, when neighbors might arrive with axes, not invitations, this closeness was protection. In Njal's saga, a raiding party tries to ambush a homestead under cover of night. But someone inside stirs. Not because they were standing guard, not because they heard a noise through the wall, but simply because they were already awake, or nearly awake, and heard something strange. That small moment of alertness set off a chain that saved the entire household. Communal sleep was the alarm system. There was always someone awake enough to notice. Modern sleep science backs it up. Today, researchers studying sleep in traditional societies, from the Hadza in Tanzania to indigenous groups in South America, have found that communal sleeping doesn't disrupt rest. It enhances it. Why? Because humans are social animals. And when we sleep near people we trust, our brains let go. The primitive parts of us, the parts wired for danger, feel safe. Less anxiety. Lower cortisol. Deeper sleep. A study in sleep health found that people with stronger social bonds, those who sleep near family or trusted companions, have higher quality, more restorative rest than those who sleep alone. Isolation, it turns out, might be the real sleep thief. And yet, there was room for privacy in Viking longhouses. Excavations at Coppergate in York revealed textile dividers, woven wool curtains, strung across portions of the platform. In wealthier households, there were bed closets, box-like sleeping compartments, raised slightly above the main floor, where the head of the house and their spouse could retreat for quiet or intimacy. These weren't common. They were a mark of status, but they show that even in shared sleep, boundaries were understood. Still, most nights, privacy gave way to proximity, and the emotional benefits ran deep. Imagine a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, falling asleep with the low rumble of an uncle's voice on one side and the steady breath of their mother on the other. Imagine the comfort in that, the safety, the security of knowing that no matter what creaked outside, you weren't alone. You'd never be alone. The tribe slept as one. That was Viking sleep. Not silent, not sterile, not carved into cubicles, but alive, breathing, human. And maybe, just maybe, we've lost something essential in the walls we've built around ourselves. Chapter 6. Built to rest. The Viking bed was smarter than you think. When Astrid pulled back the woven wool cover that night, a soft, earthy scent rose from the bedding. Dry grass, warm wool, a hint of pine smoke lingering in the fabric. It wasn't luxury by today's standards. There was no down, no memory foam, no velvet throw pillows. But as she lay back on the raised wooden platform tucked against the longhouse wall, her spine found something it never had to search for. Support. That's the word modern sleep scientists would use today. Support, alignment, ventilation. But Astrid didn't need a study to tell her she'd sleep well. She had centuries of instinct, and a bed built by hand, layered by season, adjusted by need. Simple? Yes, but brilliantly effective. Let's break it down. Viking beds weren't beds the way we picture them. Separate, framed, stuffed, branded. Instead, they were functional platforms, typically raised 40 to 60 centimeters off the ground. The archaeological site at Firkat, a Viking fortress in Denmark, revealed these platforms tucked tightly along the interior walls of longhouses. They were built from wood planks or split logs, not fancy but stable, flat, and just slightly tilted, so that the head rested higher than the feet. Turns out, that little incline, which the Vikings likely never overthought, is now recommended by modern doctors for better blood circulation and reduced acid reflux during sleep. But it wasn't just the wood. On top of the platform came the first layer, straw or hay, gathered from nearby fields after harvest, dried, shaken clean, and spread evenly. At the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, one of the richest Viking graves ever discovered, remnants of straw were found beneath wool and fur, evidence that even the wealthy slept on nature's own mattress topper. This base layer offered more than just cushion. It breathed. It allowed air to move under the sleeper, keeping heat from building up. It also meant that moisture didn't pool, mold didn't grow, and, importantly, straw could be replaced every season, minimizing dust, pests, and allergens. And over that? Wool. Coarse, rugged, insulating wool, the backbone of Viking textiles. Woven into thick covers, or left as felted padding, it kept sleepers warm even when damp. And because wool naturally resists bacteria and retains heat while wicking away moisture, it offered something few modern materials can match: a stable, dry sleep climate. In today's terms, sleep researchers call this maintaining a neutral thermal environment, and the Vikings nailed it 1,000 years ago. Finally, the top layer, the crown, was fur. Fox, sheep, bear if you were lucky. Soft, luxurious, and above all, warm. The elite were often buried with their best furs. In the Mammon burial, fur fragments were discovered layered in what was likely sleeping garments or covers. These furs weren't just status symbols, they were practical insulation. When your longhouse dipped to freezing temperatures at night, fur was what kept the cold from creeping into your bones. Together, this three-layer system, straw, wool, and fur, created something modern. Bedding companies spend millions trying to recreate. A sleep surface that was firm but forgiving, supportive but breathable, warm but never stifling. Even the firmness of Viking bedding turns out to have been a hidden strength. Modern research, including studies from the Journal of Chiropractic Medicine, now shows that medium-firm bedding actually promotes better spinal alignment than the ultra-soft mattresses often marketed as luxury. The Vikings didn't need orthopedic certifications. They just needed their backs not to ache after a day rowing a longship or hauling timber through snow. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. This wasn't just for the rich. At everyday farmsteads, like those found near Trondheim or in the Greenland settlements, the same pattern repeated. The bedding might have been rougher, the wool scratchier, but the logic held. Raised wooden platforms, natural stuffing, warmth layered from the ground up. In summer, the straw was thinner. In winter, they added more wool. They adjusted bedding not because they read about seasonal sleep optimization, but because their bodies told them what they needed, and the materials around them answered. Astrid's bed didn't come with a 10-year warranty or a commercial jingle. But when she lay down, the ache in her shoulders softened, her core stayed warm, and her breath slowed with the darkness. No overheating, no sagging foam, no strange smells off-gassing from a synthetic core. Just straw, wool, fur, and peace. So maybe it's not a surprise that modern mattress brands are now trying to recreate what the Vikings did with raw materials, calloused hands, and a deep understanding of their environment. They didn't invent sleep science. They lived it. Chapter 7. Nature's Sleep. The Viking Art of Herbal Rest. The wind was hissing against the turf roof as Astrid crouched near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a clay bowl still warm from the fire. She wasn't in a hurry. Midnight had passed. The longhouse was hushed, but not silent. A few soft movements, the crack of a settling log, the slow breath of sleepers behind the curtain. She stirred the bowl gently, watching steam rise from the water, pale, fragrant, carrying a scent that could only come from one thing: valerian root. She had dried it herself weeks earlier, pulling the thick roots from the garden at summer's end, letting them cure in the attic above the smoke. Pungent, earthy, almost musky. But it worked. It always worked. Astrid was a healer, not a priestess. She didn't speak to spirits or carve runes into stone, but she knew plants. She knew how the body unwound when touched by the right blend of roots and petals, and she knew that some nights, especially when the mind refused to slow, you needed a little help from the earth to let go. The Vikings weren't strangers to this. At sites like Jorvik, archaeologists found traces of valerian, chamomile, and even wild hops, tucked into bedding, stored in clay vessels, or charred near hearth remains. These weren't just spices or incense. They were medicine. Sleep aids. Calming agents used by people who didn't have pills or prescriptions, but who lived close to the rhythms of plants and seasons. Take valerian. Even today, scientists recognize its power. The root contains valerianic acid, a compound that acts directly on the brain's GABA receptors, helping to reduce anxiety and slow the nervous system. Modern studies show it can shorten the time it takes to fall asleep by up to 30%. And that's with no chemical hangover, no dependency, just sleep, gently invited. Then there's chamomile, a flower so delicate it folds under its own weight. But brewed into tea, it delivers apigenin, a flavonoid that calms the mind, soothes the gut, and softens the edges of a restless night. In Viking hands, it was dried and steeped, or even crushed into salves and applied to the skin, a quiet ritual before the second sleep. Sometimes, herbs were burned in the fire, their smoke wafting through the longhouse as people lay back into the shadows. Think of it. No bright lights, no chemical diffusers, just a little bundle of dried plant and smoke curling into the beams. Not for magic, for comfort. And yes, there were rituals, not spells, but routines, actions repeated often enough that the body learned their meaning. The way Astrid always lit the lamp a certain way. The way she spoke softly while stirring the herbs. The way she covered her bowl, let it steep in silence, and then uncovered it like a gift. That was part of the medicine, too. The Vikings didn't see these herbs as a cure-all. They saw them as part of the whole, one element in a larger system built for rest. A life lived outdoors, a body worn out from real labor, a night shaped by true darkness, and then, when needed, a nudge from the natural world to let go. Later, in 13th century texts like Henrik Harpestrang's medical manual, you'll find written recipes passed down from generations of herbalists. Sleep teas, wound salves, even instructions for brewing hop-based tonics to calm the nerves, centuries before beer would ever be industrialized. The seeds of those texts were planted by people like Astrid, who didn't need to write them down because they lived them every day. And modern sleep science? It's finally catching up. Studies in journals like Phytomedicine confirm what Viking women and healers knew intuitively. These herbs work. They're non-addictive, gentle, and most importantly, they fit into the whole picture of human sleep, not as a replacement, but as a partner to everything else that made Viking rest so powerful. So while Astrid sipped her brew near the fire, warm, drowsy, wrapped in wool, she wasn't just chasing sleep. She was allowing it. She had prepared her home, her body, her mind. And the herbs? They simply opened the door. That's what sleep looked like in the Viking world. Not a product, not a problem, but a natural part of living well, one cup at a time. Chapter 8. Feeding the Night. How Viking meals set the stage for sleep. The last of the firewood crackled in the hearth as Halfdan wiped his hands on a linen cloth, his belly full and his thoughts already slipping into evening quiet. Outside, the sky was fading fast, deep blue melting into a horizon of snow and stone. The day's final meal was over, and he wouldn't eat again until well after sunrise. That was the rhythm. Simple, predictable, and powerful. Halfdan, like most Viking farmers across Scandinavia, ate just 2 main meals a day. The first came a few hours after sunrise, dagvörd, a hearty mid-morning breakfast packed with energy for the work ahead. The second, natvörd, was served before sunset, somewhere around 4 or 5 p.m. By the time the stars showed up, he was done. No snacking, no late-night feasts, just quiet, digest, rest. He didn't do this because it was trendy. He did it because it worked. And today, over 1,000 years later, science finally agrees. Eating several hours before bed gives the digestive system time to finish its work. That means fewer disruptions during sleep, less tossing from acid reflux, and better regulation of melatonin, the hormone that helps the body shut down at night. Studies from the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine now confirm that late meals, especially those heavy in sugar, fat, or alcohol, can delay REM cycles and reduce sleep quality. But the Vikings? They were way ahead of the curve. Take Halfdan's evening meal. It wasn't massive. It was smart. A bowl of barley porridge topped with crushed hazelnuts and honey, maybe a slice of dried cod. Or smoked herring, oily fish pulled from the North Sea and preserved with care. If it was a good season, a spoonful of skyr, the thick, fermented dairy staple that kept for months and fed the gut like modern probiotics. Without knowing the science, Halfdan's body was getting everything it needed for sleep. Tryptophan, found in oats, barley, and fish, helped his brain produce serotonin, the precursor to melatonin. Omega-3s from the herring improved the function of sleep-regulating neurotransmitters. Magnesium in whole grains calmed the nervous system. And the natural probiotics in skyr supported gut health, which modern researchers now know is deeply connected to mental rest and hormonal balance. He didn't measure macronutrients, he didn't track calories, but his diet did something modern sleep clinics are trying desperately to replicate. It supported the body's natural wind down. And he wasn't alone. Across Norse settlements, from Trondheim to Greenland, midden piles, ancient garbage heaps, show the same story. Bones of fatty fish, charred barley seeds, crushed nuts, dairy ceramics stained from fermented milk. This wasn't a fluke. It was a system, a culture that understood how to eat, not just to survive, but to sleep well. Compare that to now. We microwave takeout at 10 p.m. We eat sugar in front of glowing screens. We rush dinner, skip breakfast, snack through stress, and wonder why our bodies won't calm down when it's time to rest. Halfdan. He had already eaten. He had worked the land, hauled wood, tended livestock, and now sat quietly by the fire. No stimulants, no chaos, just warmth in his belly and silence in his bones. The food had done its job. Now it was his turn to do the simplest thing left: lay down and let sleep come. That's the Viking way. Not a strict diet, not a fad, just the right food, at the right time, in the right way, aligned with nature, tuned to the body, and built for deep, uninterrupted rest. Chapter 9. A Body Earned It. Why Viking labor led to Viking sleep. Gunnar's hands were raw, not from a single moment of struggle, but from the slow, constant grind of days carved out of timber and wind. His palms were thick with calluses, his knuckles swollen from driving iron rivets through green wood. The ship's ribs were nearly finished, the keel straight and true. It was late, the sky already shading toward dusk, and yet he kept going, his last light coming not from a lamp, but from the pale flare of the northern sun sinking low behind the trees. By the time he wiped the sweat from his brow and rolled his shoulders, the fatigue wasn't just in his arms. It was in his bones, the deep kind that makes the body crave stillness, the kind that makes lying down feel like dropping into the sea. And that's when the real sleep came. Not drowsiness, not distraction, not the restless toss of a half-tired mind. No, this was deep sleep, slow wave sleep, the kind where breath deepens, the brain quiets, and the body repairs itself from the inside out. That was life in the Viking world. You earned your rest, and when it came like a wave, unstoppable, total, complete. Skeletal remains from sites like Trelleborg and Birka show just how physically intense Viking life really was. The bones of men often reveal exaggerated muscle attachments, signs of repetitive, heavy work like rowing, timber cutting, and stone lifting. Women's remains tell the same story: dense forearms and worn-down knees from hours of grain grinding, textile weaving, childbearing, and hauling water. These weren't one-off tasks. They were daily exertions, often burning between 3,000 and 4,000 calories a day. That's more than most athletes today. And they weren't doing it for sport. Every action had purpose: cutting trees for homes, digging trenches for drainage, mending sails with thick linen thread, leading oxen across frozen fields, tending goats, brewing ale, tanning hides. They moved not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The land demanded it, The sea demanded it, and the long, brutal winters demanded it most of all. But here's the surprising part. All that movement didn't leave them exhausted in the wrong way. It left them perfectly primed for sleep. Modern science backs this up. When you engage in outdoor, whole-body labor, your body naturally syncs to the day's light, regulating circadian rhythms. Sunlight hitting the eyes tells the brain when to release hormones like cortisol in the morning and melatonin at dusk. That daily exposure is something most people today never get. We wake up in dark bedrooms, go to work under flickering fluorescents, and spend the night scrolling under screens. The Vikings? They lived in the light, and they worked until their muscles remembered the shape of their tools and the beat of the soil underfoot. That constant effort, a blend of aerobic movement, strength, balance, and endurance, created the perfect storm for slow-wave sleep. And slow-wave sleep is the good stuff. It's where the body heals, where memories are sorted and stored, where tissue is repaired. It's the deepest kind of unconscious, and modern researchers are clear. Physical exertion, especially outdoors and during daylight hours, dramatically increases the amount and intensity of this type of sleep. Gunnar might not have known the term REM or sleep stages or circadian biology, but he knew this. After a day hauling beams and shaping oars, his body would let him fall like a stone. And when he woke up, he'd be whole again. Even better, he wasn't doing it alone. Much of Viking labor was communal, rowing in unison, hauling logs as a team, grinding wheat side by side, sharing songs, jokes, and long silences. This shared effort didn't just pass the time, it built trust. It built connection. And that, too, matters for sleep. Studies now show that people who feel socially connected and physically tired sleep faster, deeper, and longer than those who feel isolated or sedentary. In Viking longhouses, sleep came not in isolation, but surrounded by kin, after a day well spent and a job well done. So when Gunnar finally lay down that night, back pressed into straw and fur, muscles aching in that good, solid way, he didn't reach for anything to help him fall asleep. He just closed his eyes and drifted off into the kind of sleep most of us only dream about. Chapter 10. The Viking Mind at Rest. How they slept without worry. The fire was low, just embers now, glowing softly beneath the iron cauldron. Around it, the voices had quieted. No one spoke of tools or trade anymore. No one mentioned frost, wolves, or taxes owed to a jarl. Instead, they were drifting, not asleep, not awake, somewhere in the quiet space between stories and dreams. Old Kettle sat near the hearth, carving lazy circles into a piece of driftwood as he spoke. His voice was slow, almost musical. He was telling a tale, one they had all heard before, a story from the Volsunga saga, full of fate and fire and strange omens. But it didn't matter that they knew the ending. That wasn't the point. The point was the ritual, the rhythm of it, the way it pulled your thoughts away from the day's demands and into something slower, deeper, calmer. And that, right there, was the secret. Because unlike us, the Vikings didn't chase sleep. They didn't stress over it. They didn't count minutes or track cycles or stare at ceilings wondering why they couldn't shut down. Sleep, to them, wasn't a performance. It was part of living well, like eating, working, and telling the truth. They understood something we often forget. The mind has to be ready before the body can rest. And the Viking mind had tools we've lost. One of them? Storytelling. Every evening, as the light faded and people gathered on furs and benches, stories filled the dark. Legends, jokes, riddles, family memories. These weren't distractions. They were medicine. They helped people like Astrid, a farmer's wife outside Uppsala, set aside the 100 tiny worries that filled her day. And they let children, warriors, and elders alike transition out of the world of chores and decisions into a softer, dreamier one. Modern researchers now call this cognitive decompression, the brain's way of cooling down so it can ease into sleep. Another tool, acceptance. The Havamal, the Norse poem packed with hard-earned wisdom, put it plainly. The foolish man lies awake all night, worrying over everything. When morning comes, he is weary still. That wasn't just poetry. It was a prescription. Don't waste your night trying to outthink the gods. You don't control fate. You control your honor. You control your word. And if you've lived with integrity, there's no reason to carry anxiety to bed. Sleep didn't require perfection. It required peace of conscience. Even their dreams were treated differently. Vikings didn't fear dreams. They respected them. A strange vision in sleep wasn't a sign of something wrong, but a message from beyond. A guide, a symbol, sometimes a warning, but never something to dread. That belief, passed through generations, helped reduce the fear that so often surrounds our sleep today. The fear of what our minds might show us when the world goes quiet. And then there were the little things, the practices that spoke to their deeper sense of security. Near many Viking sleeping areas, archaeologists have found protective amulets, small rune stones, or Thor's hammers, tucked beside bedding. Not superstition. Comfort. Something solid, close at hand, to remind you that you were not alone. And of course, the biggest source of comfort was the people around you. In Viking longhouses, you rarely slept alone. Family, friends, servants, even animals, in some cases, shared the space. Someone would always stir at the sound of trouble. Someone was always near. That kind of communal vigilance meant individuals didn't need to sleep with one eye open. Modern studies in sleep psychology back this up. When people feel safe, when they feel connected, when they feel they've done enough for the day, their nervous systems let go. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and sleep takes over naturally, without force. The Vikings didn't have blackout curtains or white noise machines, but they had something far stronger: mental clarity. A culture that valued honor over control, story over silence, ritual over reaction. They didn't see rest as weakness. They saw it as wisdom, earned by action, secured by community, and carried gently into the night by faith in something larger than themselves. So when Astrid finally blew out the tallow lamp and lay down beside her husband, the sound of old Ketil's voice still echoing in her mind, she didn't count sheep. She counted blessings. And then she slept. Chapter 11. The Viking Sleep Code. What they knew that we forgot. When morning finally broke over the fjord, the mist clung low to the water, quiet and silver. The longhouse was still. Inside, the coals had burned down to a faint glow, and the scent of straw, smoke, and wool hung in the air like memory. The sleepers stirred slowly, not jolted by alarms, not dragged from restless dreams, but gently, like the tide easing back from shore. For the Vikings, this was normal. This was sleep. And somehow, without data, without apps, without guides or hacks or prescriptions, They had created a sleep environment so aligned with human biology. It still amazes scientists today. But here's the twist. They didn't do it on purpose. They weren't trying to optimize anything. They just lived right. They lived in rhythm. Let's break it down. They didn't chase 8 hours of straight sleep. They followed biphasic rhythms, 2 natural sleep phases with a quiet, gentle wake in between, often filled with fire tending, soft conversations, or quiet thought. That wasn't a disorder. That was balance. They didn't sleep surrounded by glowing blue screens or artificial light. Their homes were dark, lit only by the orange flicker of the hearth or a tallow lamp. That level of darkness triggered melatonin exactly when their bodies needed it. They didn't sleep alone behind closed doors and walls. They slept together, families, neighbors, workers, often on shared platforms lined with straw and fur. That communal safety wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It reduced the hypervigilance that keeps so many of us up at night. Their bedding wasn't plush or luxurious, but it was natural. Fresh straw, layered wool, insulating furs, all breathable, firm, and responsive. Modern orthopedic research now shows that's exactly what our spines want. They didn't eat late. Their meals, rich in protein, omega-3s, and whole grains, were taken hours before sleep, giving their bodies time to digest, fueling sleep rather than fighting it. And they didn't snack under artificial light. They fasted overnight without realizing the value we now place on it. They moved, all day, hard work, outdoors, in the cold, in the sun, with tools and animals and sweat. That kind of physical output aligns perfectly with our evolutionary design for slow-wave sleep, the deep, restorative phase where real healing happens. They drank herbal brews, valerian, chamomile, and hops, not as trends, but as tradition. Plants they'd grown and trusted, passed down through the hands of midwives and healers. And it worked. And maybe most importantly, they didn't worry about sleep. The Havamal told them not to. The sagas reminded them to let go. They knew fate had the final word. And when they laid down, they did so knowing they'd done what they could with the day, with their hands, their honor, and their heart. That psychological clarity let their minds stop spinning. And that's when sleep came. Now compare that to us. We lie awake in climate-controlled bedrooms, overstimulated, undermoved, panicked over blue light and deadlines, watching the clock like it's a judge. We buy high-tech mattresses, track our REM cycles, drink melatonin in gummy form, and still, we struggle. Maybe the truth is this: we've been sleeping against ourselves, but it doesn't have to stay that way. We don't have to sail longships or grind flour by hand to reclaim the Viking way of sleep. We just have to return to something more human, something simpler. Darken your room, wind down with a story, not a screen. Eat dinner early, move your body during the day. Choose bedding made from things the earth understands. Drink a calming tea, light a candle, sit in silence. And above all, let go of the pressure to sleep perfectly. Because that's the paradox. The Vikings slept so well, not because they tried to, but because they lived in sync with their world. They worked hard. They ate well. They felt safe. They honored their stories. And when night came, they surrendered. And that may just be the wisest sleep lesson of all.